everyone, this is Sam Black with Drafting Archetypes, and today I'm going to be taking a first look at Outlaws of Thunder Junction with a preview episode. So this is quite a while before the set's actually released or even pre-released. I haven't played with all the cards. In full disclosure, I haven't even read every card in the set. I have read all of the commons and skimmed most of the uncommons and looked at what the themes are and the mechanics and considered how they play together. And so I'm going to be giving my first impressions of all of that. So this is all very, very speculative. People who've listened to the podcast for a while are probably familiar with other episodes that I've done like this. I'm not going to attempt to tell you which the best cards are, but I will highlight some cards that I think will be particularly useful to supporting certain themes and certain color combinations. So that's the agenda for today. As always, the notes are available to follow along at patreon.com/draftingarchetypes for appropriate patrons. So for those who have not read the official material, I'm going to go over briefly what each of the color pairs' stated theme is, but also for each of them I'll be talking about how and how much I think it works and some key cards to look for and stuff like that. So blue-white is phrased differently in the official materials, but basically it's don't cast spells from your hand on your turn. There are cards that pay you for not having cast any spells from your hand this turn, and the idea is that if you spend your turn plotting something, then you didn't cast any spells. And if you cast something that you plotted previously, you didn't cast a spell from your hand. So if every turn you plot and then cast the thing you plotted and then plot again, you never cast spells from your hand and you trigger those things every turn. Also, if you dedicate your mana to casting an expensive instant and you just pass and then play an instant from your hand on your opponent's turn, that would be another way to get the benefit from the cards that want you to not play cards from your hand. Both of the blue, white, gold, like the signpost uncommons, reward you for this thing. As far as commons that support this strategy, there's Holy Cow, which is a 3-mana 2/2 flash flyer that gains 2 life and scries 1 when it enters the battlefield. There's Inventive Wingsmith, which is a 3-mana 2/4, and then when you don't cast any spells on your turn, at the end of your turn, it gets a flying counter, maybe only if it didn't have one. So the point is, you play this thing, and then ideally the next turn, you spend your mana plotting or passing or whatever, and then you have a 3-mana 2/4 flyer, which is, a little above rate. Nothing special, especially since it doesn't fly like the turn you play it, but it's something to work toward. It's not bad. Then there are a variety of different cards with plot that are reasonably expensive. All of them fit this theme. Stagecoach Security is white 4/5 that you can cast for 4, plot for 3, and it gives your guys +1/+1 in vigilance when it enters. Then there's Gin of Fool's Folly, which is the same situation, 5 to play, 4 to plot for just a blue 4/3 flyer. Lone Shark is 4 to play or 4 to plot for a 3/4, and if you played 2 spells this turn, you draw a card. It's kind of more for the blue-red deck, but certainly can work here. Then there are some instants that work pretty well. In addition to Holy Cow, you have Daring Thunder Thief is a 4-mana 4/4 flash blue creature, but it enters tapped. So it's it lets you spend your mana at the right time, but it doesn't let you ambush an attacker. But it's pretty big for a blue creature. And then there's Phantom Interference, which I think is a very good card. This is an instant with Spree, and it ends up either being 2-mana counter unless your opponent pays 2, which is a card that I'm generally low on, but generally ends up having a pretty good win rate. Here I like it because instead of that, it can also be just a 4-mana 2/2 flyer with flash which isn't great, but it's very nice to have a cheap counter spell that does something late. And then for 5 mana, you can get a 2/2 flyer and a counter spell unless they pay 2. And that part seems pretty great to me. And then Stop Cold is a 4 mana flash aura. Enchanted creature artifact becomes tapped, loses all abilities, and doesn't untap. So an expensive removal spell that you can play on your turn. White also has an expensive removal spell that you can play on your opponent's turn. It's like an Oblivion Ring that you can spend 2 extra mana to play with flash. So this is not an archetype where you're never going to cast spells on your turn, and it's not really asking you to. Stuff like the Inventive Wingsmith really just wants you to do that once at some point, ideally some point shortly after you cast the Wingsmith. So I think that this theme is reasonably well supported. Like there are plenty of ways to not spend mana on your turn, but I think it's like not going to be super prescriptive. Like your whole deck isn't going to revolve around this concept. It's just going to be that you're going to have some cards that pay you for doing this, and you're going to be able to sculpt your game such that you take advantage of those cards, once or twice without like going too far out of your way to do it. Blue Black's like theoretical theme is crimes. Honestly, red kind of seems there are a few situations here where the theme of a color pair is like missing the color that's like best at enabling that theme. Like notably, to jump around a little bit, like Blue Black's theme is crimes, but like red cards generally seem better at like committing crimes, or at least like setting up situations where you can crime every turn. And like Red White's theme is mercenaries, but like Black makes more mercenaries than red or white. So a bit of weirdness there, but Blue and Black have some things that reward you for having committed a crime and some things that let you commit crimes. Notably, there's no black common that like lets you commit crimes multiple times, and the only blue common is a 2-mana 2/1 that when it attacks, target creature gets -3/-0 until end of turn, unless I'm like misreading something and missing something. So the 2/1 that shrinks an opponent's creature is like, we've seen a lot of cards like that. They're usually not very good, but when you care about the fact that you are targeting your opponent's creature and that's triggering crime stuff, the card gets a lot better. And it's like it seems like bad, but any amount of synergy could push it into pretty good. So I think that card will end up being like pretty heavily played by decks that care about crimes and not played by decks that don't, which means the decks that care about crimes should be able to get it pretty easily. And then so that's going to work with your 3-mana 1/4 Vigilant that gets +2/+0 if you've committed a crime, which is also blue. And then there's a Divination that costs 1 less if you committed a crime. And then as far as like easy ways to commit crimes in blue, there's Take the Fall, which is a blue instant. Target creature gets -1/-0 or -4/-0 if you controlled an outlaw and you draw a card. And then in black, there's a 5-mana 5/4 that gets indestructible if you committed a crime. I'm not very high on that one. And then there's Raven of Fell Omens, which is 1 in a black for a 1/2 flyer that drains your opponent when you committed a crime. And that one I think is pretty good. But I don't know if it's going to be like more useful in blue-black than like blue-red, for example. But I do like the idea of combining the 2/1 that shrinks their guys with the 1/2 flyer that drains them. That seems like a reasonable like blue-black tempo kind of setup. Black-red is Outlaws. There are a bunch of creatures that are the appropriate types, and they have small synergies. No like really key cards that I want to point to. There's like a 3/2 Trample for 3 that makes a treasure if you have an outlaw, but it's mostly just like, mercenaries are outlaws. Just like get the stuff that is outlaws, and they kind of work well together. Red-green is Power 4+, which is like my least favorite theme for red-green because it's usually, I don't know, it's just not a very interesting theme. Incidentally, most of the Power 4+ creatures happen to be mounts. So the cards that like say that they care about mount are going to play pretty well in your red-green stuff. Theoretically, green-white is the mount archetype, but mounts are spread through all of red, green, and white. Those are the only colors with common or, I believe, uncommon mounts. I think there are rare mounts in other colors, but so there's a decent amount of overlap between mounts and this 4+ power stuff. As far as commons that care about the 4 or more power thing, there's like a reprint of 1 green, 1 colorless, 3/3 that can attack if you have a 4+ power guy. Yeah, as usual, it doesn't really seem like this matters all that much. Green white is mounts. It's going to, be pretty similar to Outlaws, where the cards you want for it are the ones that say mount and the ones that have mention of mounts and the things that like do stuff when they saddle creatures or whatever. And then, cards that like fill out presumably an aggressive curve because mounts care about attacking. So green white, slightly linear aggro situation. White black is fodder. They call it something different. They call it attrition in the like official guide thing. I think of attrition as more of like whatever. Point is, you're making guys, you don't care if they die, or you're actively sacrificing them, or whatever. There's like a white 1/3 lifelink that draws a card when it dies. There's a white 3 mana 3/3 that gets a +1/+1 counter whenever 1 or more creatures you control die. This card is usually like a 2 mana 1/1 or a 3 mana 2/2. This one only triggers once if multiple creatures die in combat, so it really wants you to be like sacrificing your creatures to get value out of it, but starting as a 3 mana 3/3 makes this card a lot better than the other cards like it. I think this one's going to be pretty good. And then in black, there's like a 1 in a black that's raise dead and make a mercenary, which is pretty good for getting fodder. You can return your creatures that are particularly good at getting sacrificed and then also make another token and then like replay and re-sacrifice your thing that's good at getting sacrificed. So you can get a lot of fodder going with that. For example, you can return Zumi Linebreaker, which is a black 1/1 that makes a mercenary when it dies. So blue-red. Blue-red's theme is cast 2 spells in a turn. Plot makes this pretty easy to do. Loan Shark is the guy that draws a card if you played 2 spells this turn and has plot. So you plot that, and then next turn you cast anything, and then cast that from plot, and you draw a card. There's also Take the Fall is the cantrip that I mentioned in blue-black that's 1 mana to like cycle and be a crime. Obviously, that's also a good way to double spell. Highway Robbery is 1 in a red. Discard a card or sack a land, draw 2 cards, plot 1 in red. I think this card's really good. Tormenting Voice, you often want to like spend the mana on turn 2 because it's like your only thing that you can do with the mana, but you don't actually know what you want to discard yet. And drawing the 2 cards right away on turn 2 doesn't help you because you don't have any mana to cast them. So even ignoring any outside synergies, the ability to like spend mana for this early and then cast it later and wait on the decision about what you want to discard or sacrifice to draw. Also, the ability to sacrifice land in the late game is huge. With Tormenting Voice, you top deck it late, and if you're empty-handed, you can't cast it. Whereas in a situation where you top deck it late and you're empty-handed, you probably don't care at all if you sack a land and then you draw 2 cards. So this is a really, really big upgrade over Tormenting Voice for like general limited play. And then also, it's being a spell that you cast later for no mana in a way that's like not particularly inconvenient for you, and you could set it up really early, and it's finding you more cards to double spell in future turns. So I think Highway Robbery is really, really good in blue-red and enough better than Tormenting Voice that you might just kind of want it for general utility in red decks. And then Irascible Wolverine is another card that I'm very high on. This is 2 in a red for a 3/2. ETB, exile the top card of your library. You can play that card until end of turn. You can plot for 2 in a red. So you're usually not going to want to just like cast this on turn 3 as a 3/2 because you'll just exile the top card of your library and you won't be able to do anything with it. Instead, you plot it, you cast it next turn, and then it's going to basically draw a card. Maybe it's land, maybe it's not. If it's not, you probably have another spell in your hand you can cast for a second spell type thing. In the very late game, you might just cast it straight up and hope that you have mana for whatever it hits. But I think this card's very good. So I kind of like what's going on with blue-red here. Like, plot's just such a good way to set this up, and the support looks pretty good for it. And then also there's Rodeo Pyromancer, which is 3 and a red for a 3/4. Whenever you cast your first spell each turn, add red, red. So that gives you mana to go toward casting your second spell. I'm not as high on that one as the other ones, but it could be pretty strong for this sort of thing. Black green is graveyard / recursion stuff. Doesn't look deeply supported at common. Like, there's nothing that like counts your graveyard or anything. There's not like a lot that gets creatures from your graveyard. There's like a self-mill card in black and a self-mill card in green. And then there are like a few, but not very many payoffs, so uncommon. Black green's themes look present-ish, but very loosely supported. This is certainly nowhere near as intense of a graveyard strategy as we've often seen. This is one where I feel like it barely got a theme. It's just like, yeah, green-black cards do green-black stuff, I guess. Red-white is Mercenaries, which is basically just like tokens. They might give you profitable attacks that you didn't otherwise have because of the tap ability of Mercenaries. There are a few synergies, that care about Mercenaries specifically. There's a signpost that like makes your Mercenaries work better. Then green-blue is plot, which I don't really understand. Like, blue-red and blue-white are also plot, but like in a way where they do something kind of interesting with it. Like, they care about what plot does instead of just being like, I don't know, plot stuff. It'll work out. So that one's kind of ambiguous. So next, the fixing in this set is really, really good. I think of Kaldheim as a set that had very good fixing because it had common dual lands and also a common land that you could choose any color for it to tap for, so an Evolving Wilds variant basically. And then Murders felt like it had pretty good mana even with only 2 common lands, with one that basically let you choose a color for it to tap for and another that was a little bit expensive to let you tap for any color of mana. This set has everything Kaldheim had, and also has a Crystal Grotto variant, a land that surveils when it enters the battlefield untapped, and you can spend a mana of any color to add you can spend a colorless to add a generic to add a mana of any color. So it has the choose a color when you play it, and the can give any color 2 land slots that Ravnica had, in addition to a full 10 common dual lands. And then in addition to the lands, it also has 3 green commons that can color fix and 2.5 uncommons that can color fix. There's like a Campus Guide variant, a colorless 2/2 that can tap for a mana of any color, and a colorless equipment that gives you a treasure, so you can use that to fuel a splash. So, like, really incredibly good mana. Like, strictly better than Kaldheim, basically, where Kaldheim was already extremely generous. Given that, I think that it's worth being aware of how decks that play more than 2 colors play, because certainly if you're me, you're not expecting to draft 2 colors most of the time, I'll tell you that. So here I didn't go super deep on like, if it's not obvious, what does this do? It was more like, here's where it's obvious. Otherwise, maybe there's nothing, maybe there's something. So like, for example, looking at Esper, I'd say the synergies between the pairs is pretty unclear. Like, blue-white wants you to not cast spells from your hand on your turn. Blue-black wants you to commit crimes. And like, a lot of the stuff that wants you to commit crimes specifically would like you to do it on your turn. Like, the 1/4 vigilance that gets +2 power if you've committed a crime, that matters a little bit more if you commit it on your crime when you're on your turn when you're attacking with it. So that's not necessarily the best fit with like not doing stuff on your turn. And then white-black, which is the other part of this, is like the fodder theme, which really doesn't play very well with like the crime thing. Like none of the pairs fit together in a particularly coherent way to me. Maybe, there's still just like a generically good Esper control deck or whatever. That's not hard to imagine. You have reasonable removal and card draw and stuff in all of these colors. But as far as some kind of like linear connection between this stuff, I'm not seeing it at first glance. As compared to, say, Grixis, where there's pretty good overlap between crime and outlaws, particularly because like Vile Smasher, which is a red-black uncommon signpost for outlaws, when you play an outlaw, it damages an opponent once a turn, which commits a crime. So it means that all of your outlaw stuff triggers all your crime stuff. And then there's some other red cards that are good at committing crimes, so you get to like add recurring crime stuff to your blue-black I want to commit crimes thing. And like there's a crime, cheaper to cast. There's divination that's cheaper if you've committed a crime. The divination is going to work well with your double spell thing in blue-red. You're looking for cheap ways to target, like Take the Fall, the 1-mana cantrip that commits a crime and draws a card, is going to work with the crime and the 2-spell thing. So pretty clear, pretty good synergies in the different color combinations among Grixis. Jund is tough because I don't think that green-black or green-red really have much of a theme. So, like, the creatures with power greater than 4 or greater do not tend to be outlaws, so there's not a lot of overlap there. The mercenaries are outlaws, and they can get you to 4 power, but like they're also creature tokens. Like creature tokens don't really interact with graveyard synergies, so Jund is also not really clear what's going on there outside of like mercenaries work with 4 power stuff, but like that's already built into like red. Naya, mercenaries like kind of play well with both mounts and the 4 power plus theme. They can like get you up to 4 power and they can saddle your mounts. And the mounts are in all of these colors, and most of the 4 power creatures are mounts anyway. So Naya seems pretty coherent. Bant, blue green and blue white are already basically the exact same theme. They're both just like plot. And then unclear how mounts fits into plotting. Probably doesn't, but sounds like Bant is most likely a little bit more controlling. The mounts are more aggressive, and you probably skip that thing. And you're just like Bant plot control. Jeskai, reasonable synergies between the like don't cast thing and the 2 spells per turn because of the overlap with plot and stuff. Presumably, this is a similar situation to Bant, where like the blue stuff overlaps, but the aggressive not blue stuff doesn't really make sense with the blue stuff. Where like I don't know what you're doing with mercenaries in your like weird, plot deck that's trying to like spellslinger plot deck kind of, but I don't know, maybe. Usually, I think Sultai has more obvious synergies. Like often this Sultai stuff works really well together with some kind of like mill thing and graveyard thing and stuff. But here, like the plot and crime things are kind of spell heavy, and the graveyard thing seems to care more about creatures in graveyard. I'm not really seeing how any part of this really works with any other part. I kind of trust Sultai to like maybe be able to be just like generic, some ramp and control type stuff, but I'm not seeing any clear linear connections here. Mardu's basically a perfect fit. You have outlaws, mercenaries, and fodder are more or less all the exact same theme. The mercenaries are outlaws, which are good fodder, and even though white has very few outlaws, it does have some, and they're the ones that want to go in the like fodder deck anyway. Like the only problem with Mardu is that all of the stuff is pretty aggressive and you're looking at a 3-color deck, but you can just get like a little bit more grindy, and with a lot of fixing, I think it can work pretty well. Temur, double spell plus plot synergies in the blue part of this. I don't really believe in the 4 power thing. Kind of with like every blue deck, it's like, well, there's this like plot, double spell stuff, and then whatever is going on with the other color pairs, I don't know. Abzan, there's like arguably some natural overlap between like graveyard and fodder. Not clear how mounts would fit into that, and not super clear how much graveyard's a thing and how much the fodder stuff is going to contribute to the graveyard stuff that is a thing. Maybe like fodder plus mounts is the more important part because you have like random little guys around that can like crew the mounts, but or saddle the mounts. But that's another one where like, yeah, it's fine. And that's pretty much my first impressions from looking at this. Like I said, I think, there are certainly going to be more discovered themes that are like, oh, this specific card that's these colors plays well with like this specific set of cards from this other color that's different from like the colors that it is, and that like little pocket of synergy basically creates an archetype in this 3-color pair where it wasn't necessarily obvious from the stated goals of the colors. The exact details of what the cards do matters in a way that is like, deeper than I've looked into. And also, for a lot of the themes where I'm like, I don't know, this seems a little undersupported, I would not be surprised if there are some like very like heavy-handed rares that like really make it work, where it's like most of the time you don't really care about 4-power stuff, but if you have, these rares that like make all of your 4-power creatures crazy, or like go crazy if you have a lot of 4-power creatures, then you actually care a lot about like getting all the 4-power creatures you can. Incidentally, there's also like deserts. I didn't really look into like desert wasn't part of any of the stated color pairs, and I didn't like look at the breakdown of which colors care about deserts. I think deserts for the most part are like pretty loose and pretty flexible, but that is like another element that's going on maybe. But I think that mostly that's just going to be like part of your mana fixing, and cards that access deserts are just like giving you access to extra fixing by finding your dual lands. So that's a lot of like info dumping that I'm guessing is going to be relatively hard to follow without familiarity with the cards for anyone who hasn't been like deeply studying the spoiler. But hopefully it still managed to be a coherent overview to give you kind of foundation for like looking about and thinking about the cards and like moving into processing other stuff that you encounter on this. So I'm going to turn it over to chat for questions and follow-up. And as always, thanks to the newest patrons, so Extended and Tony. Thank you very much for the support. For anyone else who is looking to support the podcast, get in on the notes. If you had trouble following along, there is a handy notes page that makes it a lot easier that is available to patrons. So if you're looking to jump back into Limited, if you've maybe been on a break, new set is always a great time to do that. And getting in on the Patreon can help get prepared. So moving on to questions from chat. Play booster layout is a hot topic as it started with MKM. Do I still think looking at the base set is a good baseline with not one but 2 bonus sheets in the slots? I think that, in reality, it's like easiest to look at like commons and signpost uncommons, but definitely, higher rarity cards have an outsized impact because they're more powerful and you end up drafting around them and they can pull you in pretty strong directions. That's kind of what I was getting at with the like note that the things that look a little bit undersupported might end up really coming together with like the right rares or whatever. So I think that, as far as the like two different bonus sheets, my understanding is that like the big score, which is a bonus sheet exclusively of mythics, is not likely to have a huge impact on draft, and that you're not going to see those cards very much. And I would suspect that most of them are like designed more for um, constructed formats, which could be standard or commander or whatever, more than they are designed for this limited format. Which means that they'll probably either just generically be bombs, or they won't really have a place, and they'll be less likely to be like, oh, hey, this is a like really good card for this particular limited archetype. There might be some of that, but for the most part, not so much. Especially since, as I understand it, the big score stuff was like originally designed to be a different set entirely. So it's really, I can't see how it would be, feature very many cards that are like intended to work with stuff in this limited format. So I think it's going to work more like, there'll be some, curveballs thrown at you by bonus sheets, but less like it's going to really change much about, core understanding of archetypes. Do I think playing creatures / having a board presence early will be more important than normal due to taking turns off to plot? I kind of do, yeah. So like the way that plotting a creature works is basically like it's very similar to like playing a creature that enters the battlefield tapped, where it can't block on that first turn. And then, also it can't attack the following turn, of course, if it doesn't have haste. It's not like suspend or something. So it's weird. Like, I want to say creatures are slower, but not exactly, because like often you're like spending 4 mana for a 5-drop, but you did spend 4 mana and not get a blocker down on 4. So that is an extra turn of getting beat up. And it has certainly been my experience in the past that creatures that enter the battlefield tapped, that's like a bigger drawback than it looks like it is. Like getting beat up for an extra turn makes it a lot harder to stabilize against like aggressive decks. So I do think that like the existence of plot is good for aggro decks, which means that if you aren't already on the board to be able to like block and you're like way on the back foot, you kind of won't be able to afford to plot because you'll just like get killed for not playing the blocker. So as we've seen with every limited set for the past few years, I think it's going to be like really important to have a good curve and plenty of 1 and 2 drops so that you're not too far behind, so that you can afford to get value out of your more expensive cards by plotting them without getting beaten up. So I certainly would not discount any of the like 1 and 2 drops, either that attack well or block well, because if they attack well, they're going to be really good for punishing your opponent for like the plot stuff that really does generate quite a bit of value if you can afford to do it. And if you're plotting, you're going to need to like be set up in a position where you can afford to do it yourself. So I guess what I would say is plotting is like very slow and makes it harder to defend yourself. So it's a format where blocking is not punished, but is more difficult than it would usually be. It's at odds with getting value, where usually, decks that are trying to get value also prioritize blocking so that they can get that value. Here you have to, use different cards for that. You have to set up blocking with other cards than your plot cards to be able to take advantage of the plot cards as value spells. So yes, I definitely think that overall plot amplifies the significance of the early battlefield. Early creatures get invalidated by larger creatures. The longer it takes for that to happen, the more the early creatures matter. So if your 3-drops don't come down on 3 and instead come down on 4, that's a full extra turn of the 2-drops getting to matter. So yeah, I do think plot's going to be pretty significant in terms of like its existence makes cheaper creatures more important. how well do I think plot will play compared to foretell? They're definitely similar mechanics. Plot's more expensive up front, which means that foretell, like taking off 2 is a very different structure than taking off 3 or 4. Like foretell meant that you didn't want 2 drops as much because you would just foretell and then play another thing and it would catch you up. Whereas here you want like 1 and 2 drops a lot more, and like taking off like later turns and spending like investing more mana without getting an immediate payoff is, scaling how expensive it is. In a way, plot is actually kind of similar to disguise in spots where your disguised creature doesn't want to trade with or is smaller than the creatures that already exist, right? Like there are spots where your 3 mana is basically setting a creature aside so that like you can flip it up on a later turn. And plot's kind of like that if you assume that you can just never like, trade with a creature while it's disguised. I was thinking the 1/3 lifelink is probably good in plot decks for that reason. I think that so the 1/3 lifelink is this is a white common, 1 and a white for 1/3 lifelink that draws a card when it dies. I think it's just a very good card. It's definitely good at like blocking and buying you time so that you can do plot stuff. Lifelink is very good with your mercenaries. They can make it bigger so that you're gaining more life. And because it draws a card when it dies, it also works well with the fodder stuff. I think that card is just very strong. Wild guess as to the speed of the format. I think it's going to end up being fast to punish plot. I think that, like, it's interesting because plot does kind of slow it down compared to creatures just entering the battlefield tapped, because when a creature enters the battlefield tapped, it can attack the next turn. Whereas with a plot creature, it can't attack the turn that you play it from plot. So like it can't attack until 2 turns later. So if plot's good, or when you're playing against a plot deck, they're actually very slow to start killing you. But I think that what's going to happen is that the pressure to be on board early because of taking later turns off ends up making the format pretty fast and making cheap spells very good. So I think it's going to lead toward being a bit of a faster format. But you're also in this interesting spot where there are a lot of really good common tap lands and decks that really want to play a bunch of them to support a lot of colors, which makes it hard to like curve out 1-drop, 2-drop. So maybe you end up, going just like playing, hoping, like leaning really, really hard on 2-drops specifically, and hoping that playing a 2-drop is enough to buy you time to plot a 3 or 4-drop. And if people end up feeling like the thing to do is play a defensive 2 and then start plotting stuff, that could potentially make the format very slow because they're so slow to start attacking. And once, if both players are doing that, then you just kind of you go like, all right, we're just going to sit here and accumulate as much value as possible. So I guess my answer on speed is polarized with pressure to be able to like play it, on curve. So there's a suggestion that Wizards doesn't want the kind of dynamic where both players are sitting back accruing value. I would suggest that the best way to tell what kind of dynamic they want is by looking at the cards that they print. And if the cards they print lead to that kind of dynamic, then presumably they do want it. And as to the suggestion that it's like more exciting if one player is the aggressor and one is the defender, I would suggest that different players enjoy different kinds of games. And if you have a match where both players have drafted slow, like plot decks, it's more likely that both players are interested in that kind of game and might specifically enjoy games where both players are like sitting back and trying to set up their cards for maximum value. There are players, myself included, who really enjoy control mirrors, especially in limited, and that actually sounds very fun to me. And I think that limited formats are really most fun when the widest variety of different dynamics within a game are possible. And so I would urge you to move away from the preconception that a certain kind of gameplay that you see being possible isn't desirable, because I think at this point, a lot of, especially the senior designers at Wizards, have a pretty good idea of like what they're doing in terms of like what kind of play patterns the cards they're making lead to, and I would not assume that like a play pattern developing is generally like a mistake. And so if you're like using this to predict like directions of future sets or something, I guess I would suggest weakening your expectations about how narrow their possibility space is. So, with that discussion about possible play patterns that are, again, extremely speculative, that's the kind of stuff that's going to be much easier to figure out from even the first, day or two of playing. I'm going to wrap it up here. Next week is going to be weird because a week from now, I'm not going to have played yet, which means I don't really know what else I'll have to say. So I suspect that next week it's going to make sense for me to delay the podcast somewhat. I need to figure out if I'm going to be involved in the early access. If I am, I might try to do like play the early access Thursday afternoon and record the stream Thursday evening, or record the podcast Thursday evening based on my first impressions playing it. If I'm in it again, I need to look into that. So unsure exactly what's going on with the podcast, but I think I'm going to wait to record my next podcast until I can play, or at the very least watch games played with the format. So I'm sure I'll give more information on that later, but expect the podcast at an unusual time next week. So thanks everyone for listening, and looking forward to Thunder Junction, and I will be back next week. So have a good week, and that's all for now. Bye.
Prepare for light speed.